Hi, everyone, and welcome to Buzzworthy Live. Today, we're asking a simple question with big implications. Is your association built around who you serve or what you solve? I'm joined by James Young, founder and chief learning officer of the product community, and the voice behind the behind the Innovation Association newsletter. James has helped a lot of organizations rethink how they can create value, not by tearing it all down, but by starting small and building smarter. We'll leave time for questions toward the end of the show, so feel free to drop them in the chat as we go. All right, so let's jump in. James, you have a bit of a unique perspective when it comes to associations. Let me ask you, what's the risk in continuing to define your association by profession or identity? Why is this model serving a single job or role in industry no longer enough in today's environment?
Thank you, Marcus. Really appreciate the warm welcome and happy to be chatting with you live today. Really look forward to having some fun. As we all know, our world of associations have the benefit of being in a particular niche, a particular industry or profession. Um, I honor that. I think that's okay. That's how we work with together as colleagues. It's how we build community and create knowledge. Um, However, let me tell a quick story, Marcus, and then I'll bring it right back to associations. So I spent my whole career, three-quarters of my career in higher ed before I jumped into working in associations I've been in associations for about 10, 12 years now. And what I learned in higher ed when I was a young professional was higher ed is organized by discipline and department. So the social sciences are over here, and the sciences are over there, and the professional programs are over there, nursing, law, whatever it might be, architecture, whatever it might be. And that's fine. And you, as a student, you can consume your degree, and you take lots of different classes, and it's really contingent on you to like stitch it together and make sense of the world, so you can go out and become an accountant or go out and become a librarian. So there's a disconnect there that is also true in associations, and the disconnect is the world isn't organized by discipline or department. The world is like super messy. And what I'm interested in is learning communities, because I think learning communities are the best way for us as associations to create community across boundaries to identify and help us solve really hard to solve complex problems. And so even though our associations are organized typically by vertical, I argue it's in our best interest to take a problem lens, not just on our community and our identity, but how we solve problems together as a community. So if you look at something like my dad was in transportation his whole career, trucking, supply chain, there's no such thing as like a trucking problem. Yes, you could say there's a trucking problem because there's something wrong with the truck. But in and of itself, when you're trying to solve something that brings the community together, you need to pull in other people into that community so you have a rich lens on how the complexity of supply chain works and how you can do advocacy, create learning, write policy, all those interesting things. So because the world is too complex, because we need each other, and because we need to shift from focusing on single professions or single industries into solving really important problems, I would argue that there is a new way. And to infuse that into our associations is what Marcus and I will be chatting today.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Um, just to jump back into the question that I led off
Sure.
with,
Sure.
um, what do you think is the issue when associations really are focusing on profession and identity, and they're not living up to this view where they're focusing around the problem?
Let me tell another quick story, and it would be around, let's call it, I've never worked for the American Dental Association, but I know actually it's optometry. I have a friend who was interim CEO for one of the leading optometry associations. And his key question at the beginning, when he was reaching out to the staff and trying to get to know things, like he was like, "Who do we serve?"
Hmm.
And he said, almost everyone said optometrists. He says, what I was looking for and who we ultimately serve is we serve the second or third concentric circle. We serve who optometrists serve, and we serve who the problems that people who go to optometrists for need solutions. And if we don't design our association for the ultimate beneficiary of our value, then we're always going to be kind of in a really tight, insular network of somewhat like minded people. And to me, in the world of product development and associations, we need to infuse innovation in our worlds because the world is changing super rapidly and we need to respond in new ways. And one way of doing that is to bring in fresh thinking that are focused on that concentric circle. Who those optometrists serve is who the association serves. Then your diversity of need, your actual identity isn't like we serve optometrists. We move the needle on really hard to solve healthcare problems related to vision. And that's different. So your identity shifts, how you think about, what behaviors and actions you take, what value you create in that model, it shifts pretty rapidly.
Yeah, it's definitely very an interesting thought to ask associations to think beyond just their direct members and
Right.
go beyond, like you said, that next layer and think about who those members may be well working towards in terms of a
Right.
goal or who they would be serving directly. So do
Right.
you think that this approach, because of keeping saying that in this case with the optometrist, they're thinking of the the client, if you will. Do you
Mhm.
think that what are the actions that help the association stay on target in terms of being able to be more effective as an organization by broadening their approach like that?
Well, it shifts the focus. And the key word here isn't shift, the key word here is focus. What we have learned in the product community, which came out of the American College of Chest Physicians, it came out of a medical society. We designed this program. What we learned was we had an incomplete picture of who the member is and what problems the member were trying to solve. And that was in part because we had a lens of the world that was based on things that people expect from us, like events and like membership and like engagement, networking, maybe career services, some learning. So the model wasn't member based, ultimately it became member based. It was more, here's what associations do, here's what you expect of us, and here's what we're going to deliver to you. So we felt without any kind of like a radical transformation, it's kind of like, what does it look like to serve our members at the bedside? And if you ask that question, how do you perform pulmonology at the bedside? It completely changes the conversation. So the first thing you should learn is it's interdisciplinary problem solving. It's cross boundary problem solving. It's very fast. You're in an environment. You don't have a lot of time to go to the journal article, but you are using your phone and you're using your skills and your know-how and the culture there to say, how do we solve this problem with this particular patient in this room right now? And it's a small interdisciplinary learning community. And then you can say, okay, and then you pull back and you go, wow, they learn in completely different ways than we anticipated them learning. They're not just learning to refresh their boards or do continuing medical education. They're actually thinking differently on the ground about how to best serve patients so that we can improve healthcare. And so that interdisciplinary problem set needs to be reflected in how we operate. That's a problem-centric approach to how associations, that we argue associations should function. So it's a little bit of a shift. It's a flip.
Mhm.
So your first question is, how do we serve the member, how do we serve who our members serve? I mean, that's a different lens on it. And the second one would be, what is their day-to-day work environment and what are they trying to solve on that environment? And then how might we replicate that through a learning model, a membership model, a community model? And then you start to shift towards that. Well, what are the prevailing problems in this space? And how might we together as a community solve those? And the first thing you learn is you have to have advanced practice providers in the room and nurses in the room, and you have to have people who are doing, radiologists. It's a larger team. They're probably not going to become members, but you can pull them in to engage to refresh the center of how you do learning at your association. Does that resonate, Marcus?
Yeah, absolutely. I can see the benefit of shifting the focus, if you will, to and as being a good tool to really ask different questions.
Right.
And when you are asking those questions that are more holistic, if you will, in this
Right.
case of thinking beyond directly the member and even thinking about who they're engaging with and focusing in on that with great detail, it allows the association to think more holistically about, okay,
Right.
what are the needs of that person, which if we can make the member better at addressing their needs, it's only in turn going to help the member and bring them better satisfaction in terms of membership, because in this case perhaps they're going to just be more effective in
Right.
their practice.
How do we help who you serve? It's not a radical transformation. We're still supporting our member. We're still saying, hey, how do we come together as a community? It just shifts the challenges away from, hey, you need continuing ed, or we're going to have this event where we're going to have sponsors and technology providers and lots of different interesting people all in one place. And you can come to this city and we're not just going to convene and celebrate. We're going to talk about what's coming in a new way, and it's going to be a fresh way, and it's going to be based on, when we say problems, that's not a negative thing. It's like facing the challenge, literally. And when we get to other questions, I have another lens on problems that comes specifically from the world of product that continues to double down on why this is key.
Well, we've touched on it a little bit already, but perhaps you can speak to a little bit about what it looks like when an association fully commits to solving problems instead of representing those identities that you mentioned previously. So, how does that shift change when the organization sets goals, builds programs, and defines success?
Like my example earlier about higher ed, what happens in an environment when you shift from a profession or industry towards a problem lens on the profession or industry is you create the culture and the framework for a collaborative ecosystem. That's a clever phrase to call, how do we solve problems across boundaries in an authentic way that pulls in the introverts, that pulls in the mailbox members, that pulls in people who tend not to go to the annual conference. And how do you create problem huddles for people to come together? It is a design problem, but it's going to be a shift in resources that I think can be incubated at the annual meeting. So annual meetings are pretty much across the board common in our industry and associations. So I think for it to become a massive leverage point and for us to incubate some of these little cross boundary problem huddles, they would need to be care fed. You can't just come together, throw a problem on the table, and say, "Okay, our 3 days together as a annual meeting is over, and that problem is solved." No, it would pull us not into just a collaborative ecosystem, but also into some kind of a longitudinal journey in which we together commit to how are we going to approach this problem, because you can approach it through learning or advocacy or policy, through community, through engagement, through thought leadership. There's lots of ways that we can design our association. Again, what's the key problem we're trying to solve, not how do we serve the needs of ophthalmologists or optometrists. Um, I personally don't think it's a radical shift. It is a shift for the folks who are hamstrung by a couple of cash cows that most of the revenue either comes from events and membership or certification and membership. It's hard. You need to continue to feed that revenue around your capabilities and your resources. So trying to move into this more collaborative ecosystem around problems is doable, but I'm a strategy guy. You need to commit to a strategy, and the strategy, committing to a strategy is not a strategic plan. It's committing to a set of choices about who we want to be, what our identity is, and we exist around problems. We're somewhat evergreen. Problems aren't going away. There's always going to be new problems. Um, so the traditional strategic plan, which is another hat I wear in product community, it doesn't really respond well to this new world, this new model that we're describing. I think fits just what we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis in the press, in the news. I mean, everything's kind of um, chaotic, no matter what your stripes are. Um,
So, James, if identity isn't the anchor, how do you actually create a sense of belonging or a shared purpose? You touched on this a little bit, but perhaps you can unpack it for
yeah,
us a little bit more. What are the practical ways to design community and content around a shared problem?
let me answer the identity question first, and then we'll get into the practicalities. So,
Sure.
identity isn't going to go away in associations. I would just argue that my grandfather, my mother's father, never left Michigan ever. He lived to 83. He never left Michigan. My mom and us kids, we've kind of traversed landscapes. We were fortunate enough to, my parents educated us, and we traveled a lot, and we experienced lots of different things. And what I'm saying there is, if you're in an environment trying to solve problems with people who are different from you, who come from different industries, who have different lenses, like a finance person and a marketing person, and somebody literally on the ground in an emergency room trying to solve problems, you come together and you try to create a program, your lens changes. Your perspective on things changes. You don't have a perspective of Detroit. You have a perspective of the United States. You have a perspective of diversity. You have a perspective of different viewpoints. So the largest thing in how your identity would evolve in a model like this is that you would be, one, more informed, and then two, more focused. I know that sounds contradictory because you're like talking to lots of other different people who have different perspectives on a particular problem. But ultimately, when I say focus, what emerges is what's the most important thing that we need to be attending to. What's an opportunity versus what's a distraction. And then, like bees to honey, we go to opportunities, and distractions kind of fall by the wayside because we are putting problems at the center. Practical. Okay, so we've talked kind of like way up here. So I find the quickest, most practical way to design community and content around shared problems is creating what I call learning pathways. It's not my phrase, but how do we together stitch together, let's say 3 to 4 experiences over 3 months? So it's a logistics thing, but we have really good software. It's a community thing. It's kind of trying to create connection. It's some program design involved. But if you start with an annual meeting and then you start to incubate a program around a particular problem, then you can link it to, we need 2 mastermind calls around this. We need to drill down on what this particular problem is. And then we need a structure to help solve it. And that structure to help solve it should be longitudinal, but it also should be practical, meaning people should be learning from each other, but they also should be learning new content and new experiences. And I guess instead of just receiving knowledge, they would also, it's a contributory model, Marcus. It's not I go to a conference and sit in a room and consume. You think about designing around shared problems, you're going to, one, design for agency, and you're going to design for people who want to who want to be drawn to action, I guess. Kind of exciting to me. A problem-based approach doesn't just make us relevant. It can bring in people who come from tangent disciplines or industries, different professions or industries, who also have a vested interest in solving the problem.
Yeah, we often see in our practice here where we see a lot of a success when you can take someone that would say a potentially new member and move them into a place where they're actually contributing.
Right.
Um, right.
Yeah.
So they go from someone that maybe is say early on in their journey, both in their career and both with the association. And then once they make that flip to someone that's actually contributing to a community, perhaps as a subject matter expert in
Yep.
something or just conveying an experience that they've had for the benefit of the whole, you really see a new level of engagement when it comes to that member because
Bingo.
you're flipping it from something like back in the day when we were subject to broadcast TV versus how we kind of live our lives today where everything is on demand and more engaging, right? So if we're contributing to communities, there's a lot more sense of involvement and ownership in that community.
As you were talking and talking about, I don't know if I think you're probably a lot younger than I am, but broadcast TV is definitely puts a lens on this. Completely modernize, bring it up to today. If if an association can figure out how to design and pull these off, they can market it as combating the algorithm. And what I mean by that is the algorithm is really going to reinforce what we believe, show us things that we're interested based off our search history, based off where we're clicking and consuming. And that replicates the old model of associations, which would be we're going to keep you in your niche because you're interested in New York City dance as a therapeutic device for young children in education, whatever the problem is you're trying to solve. It'll keep you in that problem. And then you might be cut off from people who can help you solve that problem because the algorithm is kind of the new association. So you said it. What's the contributory model for young professionals and how to get them in the room so that they are engaging in a new way and they're not just passive consumers, either by going to a meeting and sitting in a room or being algorithmically driven by the same content that's going to just reinforce the old assumptions.
So, James, before we flip over to some questions from the audience, I wanted to ask you for some advice on their behalf in terms of if they were interested in kind of taking the first step here, what would be the safest place to get started?
What we're really talking about here is what I would consider is timeless and recognizable. People want to connect. That's been true about associations since old coffee houses, or people go to bar. People want to connect and they like and shared interests. So that shouldn't be new. We come together, we create community, right? That's true about association. Second thing we do is we create knowledge and discourse to further that community. We develop the product community because there's a problem in the association space that replicates an old model. And what we believe in the product community, and this is what we've designed at two associations I work for, now we're doing it at many other associations, is that everybody owns value creation in the world of associations. Everybody is hyper focused on value creation because if you focus on the value creation that people need to solve the problem so that they can do their jobs really well, what we see is two shifts. Membership becomes an outcome of great experience, and revenue is also an outcome of great experience, but the revenue becomes diversified over time. So we find the old model is that membership and revenue tend to be at the front as kind of like quarterly inputs. How we doing on membership? Whereas revenue, kind of the old traditional model, And we argue that the focus is on value creation, which is ultimately how does the community come together to solve problems so that we can create the right content and the right experiences to pull us in to a new space, to make us indispensable so that membership and revenue become outcomes. And we flip it, we're in the old model of what city are we going to be in? How many people can we rely on to be at the event? Are the sponsors going to come? Is the value proposition there for them? Which I think are relevant questions, but they're also, if you're solely focused on, they're the old questions. I have no idea whether I've answered your question. I don't remember what the question was.
That's okay, James. We were just trying to give some advice on some safe ways to get started. You know, as someone that's listening to this and sympathetic to your message about how they would go and bring some of these ideas into the organization and kind of give them some tools to think about where would be a practical place to get started in terms of testing the waters with these ideas.
These, if you're as old as I am, my name is James Young, but I'm not as young as I used to be. These are communities of practice. So that's a phrase you heard 20, 25 years ago that was super popular in the world of associations and higher ed. To get started, there's just a set of tools, as you and I have discussed, Marcus, in the past. Starting simple, testing different ideas with your community and seeing what works and what doesn't work is basically how product development actually works. And if associations started to have a mindset of not over focusing on the big cash cows, but thinking of them as opportunities within those cash cows to test things, perhaps at your annual meeting, which I think is a good idea to do there, incubate some fresh programming that isn't just looking for success at that meeting, but thinking of the meeting as the launch point for what I would call a longitudinal journey, to try and engage people in new ways and then to pull in people who don't attend the meeting. I call them
well, James,
yeah.
We covered a lot of ground today. Are you up for taking one question before we get out of here?
Sure.
So this is a question coming in from the audience. How do you actually identify the right problems to solve with a diverse membership base?
Well, how we would traditionally do it, which I think is still accurate today, is in the two associations I worked for, we did trend spotting. And the best trend spotting we felt was to get the most diverse group of people in the room. In one association I worked for, we called it an idea summit. In another one, we linked it to our annual conference programming. And you bring together a diverse group and you focus up front on what are the prevailing trends and problems that are faced, that we're facing in our industry or profession. Then do some super simple research, because we don't really have the time and resources typically to vet these things, but just to see who are the thought leaders in this space and to see how we might draw them in, to hopefully create a magnet effect to bring people from diverse lenses around a particular problem together so that we can actually build some programming around it. And then again, like I've alluded to, how do we take that programming that might happen at an annual meeting and use that as a breaking off point for a small community to start focusing on and solving that problem?
Fantastic. Well, James, this has been absolutely an interesting conversation. Thank you so much for your time here today. Fortunately, that's all the time that we have for the show today. So thanks for everyone for joining us. And James, what's the best place for people to find and follow your work?
I write a Substack called the Innovative Association. If you search product community Substack, you will find it. I'm on LinkedIn, and our website at Product Community is productcommunity.us. Thank you, Marcus. I really, really enjoyed this conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, James. And thanks to our viewers for joining us today. If you missed our last conversation with Elizabeth Morris from CUR, you can find her on demand on our website. And like always, have a great day, everyone. We'll see you next time on Buzzworthy Live.